Julio Padovan, with the talk entitled Photography of the Thought and Other Rare Phenomena. Julio Padovan was born in Brazil and has been studying Spiritism since the age of 15. He holds PhD degrees in biochemistry and molecular biology from the School of Medicine of São Paulo, University of São Paulo, Brazil. He moved to the United States at the invitation of Professor Brian Chait to work at the Laboratory of Mass Spectrometry and Gaseous Ion Chemistry at the Rockefeller University in New York, where he currently holds the positions of Senior Research Associate and Associate Director. Julio is responsible for translations of Spiritist books from Brazilian Portuguese and French into English. His latest translation, Missives of Hope by Francisco Xavier and Herculano Pires, was just published and is available at a bookstore's sales desk. He's a member of the Spiritist group of New York, where he's responsible for the Sunday study group. He's also a chemistry professor at the City University of New York and a lecturer for Spiritism and the General Sciences. So let's welcome Julio Padovan.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you kindly for the opportunity to contribute my presentation to the 9th U.S. Spiritist Symposium. I'll be talking about photography of the thought, as has been mentioned. And this is an expression that was coined and was used by Allan Kardec, and he borrowed it from the incipience of the field of photography that started with the daguerreotypes and later on moved into photographs, as we all know. But before I actually look into the topic of the lecture, I think it behooves us to look into the current model of the creation, the model that we got from the studies and the development of the Spiritist doctrine. According to this model, the currently accepted model, the creation is divided into two parts. We have the first part, which is spiritual, non-material, and transcendental. And we say that everything on this part comes from the spiritual or intelligent principle. The other side, the side that comes from the universal cosmic fluid, that derives from the universal cosmic fluid, is the material part, not necessarily physical, material. As I develop the talk, you will see that I'll make a difference between material and physical. So the universal cosmic fluid creates what is material, what is non-spiritual. We, the spirits, not the physical bodies, we the spirits, we start our journey as a monad, not as a spirit, which we are later upgraded to the state of a spirit. Nevertheless, it doesn't matter what the name is when we start it. We start from the intelligent principle. So we start from the transcendental side of the creation. And as we interact with the other side, we will over the universal cosmic fluid, and with that, we create the material representation or the materialization of our spirit, which we call the perispirit or spiritual body. It doesn't matter. We can use either terminology. It's important to see here that we say we will over the universal cosmic fluid. We don't mold it. We don't shape it, because the spirit has no materiality. There are no hands there to mold or to change the universal cosmic fluid. As we progress, as I said, we start as a spirit, we will over the universal cosmic fluid, and with that we create our perispirit. With that, our perispirit can be seen as a copy of our spirit, the materialization or the material form or representation of our spirits. After that, when there is a reincarnation process, we can use that perispirit as a partial template or a partial mold to create a physical body. Then, and only then, we have not only a material representation of our spirit, but also a physical, because now we have the physicality of our physical bodies. In this process, we then see ourselves not as spirits, but as a dyad, a combination of two things. We exist as a combination of spirit, perispirit. And why is that? Because we need the perispirit to be able to interact with the material side of the creation, the side that comes from the universal cosmic fluid. Without it, we cannot progress ourselves. We cannot interact with the rest of the creation. This dyad eventually acquires a physical body. That's the reincarnation process. And then we move from a dyad, a two-part combination, into a three-part combination, which is called a triad. And there, we spirits have a materialization in the form of a perispirit and a physicalization in the form of a physical body. Millions, if not billions, I cannot tell how many, but let's say billions of these dyad, triad cycles happen to us. Every time we lose the physical body, because the physical body is fleeting, is temporary, perishable. Every time we lose this physical body, we come back to the spiritual realm. And we are, from triad, we go back into a dyad, spirit, perispirit. As I said, we go through millions or billions of these dyad, triad cycles. And it's through these cycles that we actually progress. But when we talk about this, we already begin to experience our first discomfort with the current model of the creation. And here I would like to mention that I would look at this topic a little different than all the other speakers. I will actually be looking a lot further into the past. So bear with me for a while, okay, until I get to the end, and we'll see if you are going to like it or not. This discomfort starts with the nomenclature that we use. We say, for instance, that we spirits and in our materialization, the perispirit, we inhabit the spiritual realm or the spiritual world. Yet, when we look at the two parts, the spirit is spiritual, non-material, and the perispirit is actually material. So we have in the spiritual realm or world one thing that is material and another that is non-material. That is already a point for confusion, particularly if you're trying to explain it to someone who is new to the doctrine or just would like to know what exactly it is that we do or study. One other thing that I find difficult is that we then have this dyad, triad process. And in the triad, we now have two things that are material. We have the physical body and we have the perispirit. And yet, the perispirit is in the spiritual world or realm, and the physical body inhabits, as a force of expression, the physical world or the physical realm. So keep that in mind for now. Photography of the thought is actually the interactions that happen at the perispiritual level. And it's the capturing of the essence of these interactions. Kardec was interested in looking at them and in seeing what constructs can move, can be transported, translated, transmutated from the spirit side, from the spiritual side of the creation into the perispirit, into the non-spiritual side of the creation. The capturing of this moment, which he associated to taking a photograph, is what we call photography of the thought. Here, I understand, is rather dry. It's a confusing set of words. So let us look at this whole thing from an analogy. Before I even start the analogy, I always like to remind everyone that an analogy is not the thing we are trying to explain. It's an analogy, and that's it. Because if the analogy were exactly the same thing as what we are trying to explain, it wouldn't be called an analogy in the first place. It would take the name or the title of whatever it is that we are trying to describe. So let us not get carried away with it. So we can see this spirit willing over the universal cosmic fluid to create the material form of it, the material copy of it, as an object that is placed in front of a mirror in a room that has sufficient lighting. The object in front of the mirror will create a corresponding image. In this object mirror image, we see the spirit, universal cosmic fluid, perispirit analogy. The perispirit is the image, the copy that the object makes, a truthful copy. The mirror is the universal cosmic fluid. This analogy is actually pretty good. Unlike most analogies, you can actually extend it a little bit. One other thing that comes from this analogy is the fact that the object, when it creates the image, it creates a material image. Some of you might say, I don't think so. Well, if you turn off the lights, you no longer have an image, even though you might be standing in front of that mirror. If you need the particles of light, photons, whether you treat them as wave or you treat them as particles, you still need something that is material, not necessarily physical. So that image is material. So it is with the perispirit. But there's one other interesting thing that I can say to you about this analogy. It's one of those that you can truly extend to quite a while. And this is where it starts to break down. So this is where I'm going to stop. It's the last part of the analogy. We are all familiar with the house of mirrors in an amusement park. There you go, stand in front of those silly mirrors, and the mirrors themselves have distortions that create the distortions in the image, which we find so funny, amusing, whatever it is. Or perhaps we might not look at ourselves and like what we see. But the point is, it's the mirror that creates the distortions. The distortions in the mirror then are passed on to the image. Here we have to be a little more careful, because the universal cosmic fluid is both perfect and neutral. It has no distortions. So any distortions that we see in that particular perispirit, in the materialization of it, actually comes from the spirit itself. It is actually our inability, our ineptitude in willing over the universal cosmic fluid that creates a perispirit that is a true representation of what we are, with all the traits, characteristics, qualities, whether they are good or not. So in this sense, the perispirit is a true copy of the spirit. And this is why when we say photography of the thought and we capture the perispirit or the perispiritual interactions, what we are actually capturing is the very essence that exists in us, our very essence. Because that is everything that is in the spirit simply translated into the material side of the creation. Just to complement, when we see that with the physical body, that is not exactly true for everything. Because when we go from our perispirit and we create a physical body at the moment of a reincarnation, we use only as a partial template or a partial mode. Because since the physical body is going to be perishable, we are going to come here through this journey with only a few things to carry out, with only a small agenda. We're not going to have a lot of commitments. So we don't need to carry everything that we have as a perispirit. So we create a simplified copy, a copy that has only that which we'll need to carry out our reincarnation program with success. But when we go and we see spirit and perispirit, one is a copy of the other. Whatever imperfections or lack of abilities only that we see in the spirit, we'll see reflected in that mirror that we call the universal cosmic fluid, and will be passed on to the perispirit. So, at this point, let us see it with an example. Imagine now Michelangelo, and he is now about to embark on a great project. He's going to sculpt, he's going to produce the statue of La Pietà. At this moment, he hasn't started. So the construct of the statue exists only in his mind. Only his spirit possesses, if we can enlarge the meaning of the word possess here. The construct exists in Michelangelo's mind, in Michelangelo's spirit. So, what does he have to do at this point? He is going to buy the tools that he will need to sculpt the statue. He is also going to buy the block of marble on which it was produced. So let us now create, and I cannot emphasize this enough, a hypothetical scenario where Michelangelo approaches the marble vendor, and the man is very enthusiastic, is very passionate about what the artist is planning to do with that magnificent piece of medium that he's just sold. At this point, the construct, the concept of La Pietà is completely spiritual. But the moment that Michelangelo describes it to the man, to the marble vendor, he materializes it. Materializing in the sense that he transmutates what is fully spiritual into a material form, in the sense that they are discussing the idea and the thought is material. He also moves it even further when he actually explains into words. So the dialogue is a further step into that materialization of the initial construct. Materialization, but not physicalization. There is no statue. At this point, anyone walking in and listening to the two men talking won't be able to touch anything, won't be able to touch a statue. There is no physicalization. There is no physical object. And at this point, that a lot of us don't have an idea how complex the situation is, because it doesn't matter how much art this man understands, how much it understands of art, of anything that is related to the marble, to how to sculpt it, he will never be able to fully grasp what is in Michelangelo's mind, because that spiritual construct, the real construct, only exists in the mind of the artist. And the moment that he voices it, he communicates it, the other end, the receiving end, will process it based on what that end has as an intellectual background, as a moral background. So there is already a translation, and a few things are going to get lost right then and there. But it doesn't matter how accurate the translation or this transmutation of a construct suffers when it goes into a materialization. Eventually the artist buys the piece of marble, sculpts the statue, and now there is a physicalization process. There is a physical entity. Somebody else who doesn't understand anything of art, like me, can go there and, let's say, used to be the case, could touch it, could use the physical senses, which are much cruder, much coarser than the spiritual ones, and now they can sense physically what the artist communicated perispiritually, materially to the vendor, and what the artist had spiritually as a psychological construct in its spirit, in the mind. So when we see this model and we see this whole process, we see that all the perceptions that we have, whether we are talking about the perceptions here in the physical world, or the perceptions that we talk about when we are back in the spiritual world, so we are only a dyad, spirit per spirit, all our perceptions are inherently dependent on our background. Whatever I have been accumulating until this point in my life, I will use to be able to understand what I am experiencing at the moment. But I cannot be sure, and it's never the case actually, that the one next to me experiencing the same stimuli that the person next to me, or spirit or perispirit next to me, will be seeing, feeling, perceiving the same things. This physicalization process helps us, particularly now that we are here in the physical realm, that we are here with the physical body. But we must understand that not everything in our spirits end up suffering or undergoing a process of physicalization. This is the case with our abilities, with our moral traits. What we see is an indirect evidence of that, because it's very hard for me, for instance, to think of how to physicalize a moral pattern, for instance. What we see is how someone behaves, how often they behave one way or another. So this indirect process is also a part of photography of the thought, but now at the physical level. As you notice, we have to use quite a lot of the concepts from our model of the creation. But this model of the creation is beginning to get a little out of date. It is in dire need of some vitamins. We need to understand that it was put together 150 years ago. It was state of the art as a model. But we have progressed in these 150 years, and we have produced more information in these last 150 years than the entire history of humanity put together. So, what can we say about the model that is a little out of place? Let's put it this way. It's not that there are wrong concepts in it. It's very important that we understand this. One, it's matter-centric or material-centric. It's focused on the material world. Everything happens at the perispiritual level or physical level, but particularly at the perispiritual level. We also have a little bit of an embarrassment, because we go and we say one of the things we expect or that we believe is the oneness of God. And yet, at the moment that we have the model of the creation, we divide into two parts. And then where is that oneness? The other thing is that the universal cosmic fluid seems to be something that is needed for the monad or the spirit to start progressing. So it has to pre-exist the monad. And the other thing is the monad, the initial form of the spirit. It's a very unsettling situation, because we say the monad is created simple and ignorant. And then the monad, for some reason or another, somehow knows how to interact with the universal cosmic fluid and start progressing. But how? Some might say, well, it's built in. Well, it's not a very good explanation, and we should always strive to find good explanations. The other thing that we sometimes say is, well, it's not that it learns. Basically, when we start as monads, we are right at the interface. We are not in the universal cosmic fluid, and we are not from the spiritual principle or intelligent principle. We're right at the interface. But then I would ask, well, how do I then know how to veer off completely into the spiritual side, into the spiritual principle side of the creation, which is what happens? Or the other thing that we can ask is, what prompts, what drives that monad? If that monad starts at the interface, what would drive it to move or to veer off from the interface completely into the intelligent principle side of the creation? Is the model wrong? No. And this is a long-drawn, emphatic no. It's not wrong. But we need to complement it. Notice that I always said it was a model of the creation. And as a model, it is nothing more than the representation of what we can grasp at the moment, of what we have as information. As Allan Kardec puts it in Genesis, it is also a relative truth. And a relative truth needs to be constantly updated so that one day, perhaps, it will become an absolute one. But we are very, very far indeed from having it as an absolute truth. Ladies and gentlemen, I hereby propose to your appreciation the following premise, not a model, a premise. As far as we can look back, philosophically, scientifically, as far as we can look back, we will see the monad. No universal cosmic fluid. No spiritual or intelligent principle. The monad, and only the monad. Its very existence as an individuality and apart from the Creator, which means it is not the Creator. Its very existence defines the spirit or intelligent principle. When this monad, simple, ignorant, manifests itself, whatever it is, no matter for how long, how often, what is the extension or the consequences of its manifestations. When it manifests itself, the manifestations generate, represent the universal cosmic fluid. No more division, just the monad. Simple, ignorant, a oneness in the creation, much like the oneness of the Creator. We see now its existence representing the intelligent principle and its manifestations representing the universal cosmic fluid. This intelligent principle now only given by the monad, the spirit to be, the spirit in training, the paremptousia of the ancient Greeks, the essence of all things to come. In this model, we see now one particular enormous consequence, that any person who had to sit in front of an audience, a Spiritist audience, has had to confront. The question of time and space, which we usually do not answer, or if we try to answer, we don't answer it properly. If the monad is now the creation, it's not included in the universal cosmic fluid, but generates, gives rise, represents it through its manifestations. The monad creates the container for time and space, not the other way around. With the model that we currently have, the assumptions that we have, the universal cosmic fluid creates time and space, and then we put the monad inside. But not now. We start with the monad. We flip everything. We swap places. Time and space are created as manifestations of this monad. And as manifestations of this monad, it then comes to the point where we can say that the monad is not just everywhere. The monad is the everywhere. The definition of everywhere. The monad is not here or there at this time or another. The monad is actually the definition of always, of eternity. By looking at it in this way, we ask the first question, so then, how is it that I don't know about these things? Well, one thing at a time. I said we were simple and ignorant. We continue to be very simple and ignorant. Not as much, but still far from plenitude. In our progress, we create the awareness of this omnipresence and also of this ability this ability of ours of existing outside the concept of time. that time actually comes from our manifestations. This does not in any way detract from the model. It is a complementation. Much like Newtonian physics was not removed from textbooks by relativistic physics. Rather the opposite. Newtonian physics was enlarged by relativistic physics. Of course, relativistic physics contains Newtonian physics, but one simply showed that the other became a limiting case. We should still use the model in the way that we talk about with this division, particularly when we address individuals that are beginning in the field of Spiritism, in the doctrine of Spiritism, or even if they're just curious about what we do, what we study. But I would like to show to you a few things that become quite different when we look at the monad as a pre-existent to the universal cosmic fluid. In Evolution in Two Worlds, psychographed by Francisco Xavier, by the spirit André Luiz. André Luiz tells us that the human physical body is put together by trillions of cells. Each and every one of them is controlled by a primitive intelligence. But the whole assembly is not only put together, but it's under the sovereignty, the command of a relatively higher intelligence, our spirits. This is a symbiotic relationship where we use the manifestations of our brethren that are below us in the evolutionary, or not evolutionary, or trying to not use this word, are below us morally and intellectually. We use their manifestations so that we can learn and we can move forward. And in turn, we give them the opportunity of learning how to work as a complex society, in this complex biochemical approach that puts together our physical bodies, so that they one day may also be in charge, in command of another physical body, and also reach plenitude. Otherwise, they would not have an opportunity to learn. Whether it's my opportunity or somebody else's, it doesn't matter. If it weren't this way, then we would think, how is it possible for them to be put together, to be actually taken to a situation where they would learn as a group? We also see a little further into Joanna de Angelis' words, when she constantly tells us, reminds us, that everything is bound in a cosmic consciousness without losing its initial individuality. But notice that she says everything, not everyone. Our matter-centric model divides the world into inorganic and organic beings, or inorganic things and organic beings. And one starts to wonder if God would be so relapsed or wasteful as to create inorganic beings just for our own sake, just so that we could progress. To me, it sounds like another version, a more discrete form, I agree, version of we are at the center of the universe, which was then later toned down, we are the center of the solar system, and on and on. Now we are the center of the things, we are the organic ones, or the sentient ones. Is that true? One other thing is Emmanuel's words in many of the books by Francisco Xavier, where he also tells us and gives us examples after example of things that are completely inorganic. Tells us about the seasons having to arrive at the right time, or the river that has to go and take a particular direction. And we think, why are they wasting so much time with inorganic things? And we see that all this approach actually reaches its apex in the hosannas that were sung by St. Francis of Assisi when he ascended to the lofty heights. He, according to Joanna de Angelis in her book, The Psychology of Gratitude, psychographed by Divaldo Franco, she tells us that he was reported to be uttering a prayer to everything he was grateful for. And if you look at the prayer, more than half of what he mentions are inorganic things. The blue skies, the warmth of the sun, the rays of light, and so on. Then he goes to other things like the blades of grass and on and on. But one would wonder why they would use inorganic things. Perhaps because he already knew what we are only at the very beginning of discovering, that all of us are interconnected, are interwoven in the immense, single, unique tapestry of the creation. Only one. And that everything around us are manifestations of our friends, of our brothers and sisters, those above us, those below us. The ladder that takes us to plenitude is made of many rungs. Those below us were made by ourselves so that our brothers and sisters below us can climb to the position we are at the moment. Those above us were made for those who have already preceded us in reaching the lofty heights. Photography of the thought does not change because of this premise or not. It continues to be this idea of capturing the transmutation from the spirit construct into a materialization, if it stops at the perispiritual level, or into a physical body, if it goes all the way to the physical realm. The difference is that now we don't say that we capture but a materialization or a physicalization, but we capture the manifestation of that spirit, the manifestation of that monad. Perhaps in this way, we'll begin to move from photography to the movie of the thought. And perchance, one day, we'll be able to direct, in a minor scale, as co-creators, the blockbuster, mega movie picture that is the creation. Photography of the thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your attention.